Welcome to Illuminated by the Day, an exhibition curated by Kat Millman. The work shown ranges over a century, from the 1840s through the 1960s, and is presented in chronological order. The collection of photographs showcase light and shadows that occur naturally in everyday life, hence the exhibition's title. The images are black and white street photographs in which light and shadow are prevalent in the composition. Mark E. Full explains, quote, "Shadows in photographs provide added visual dimensions through contrast and heightened emphasis on lines and angles. Shadows also help to influence what observers will see first in the image." End quote, subscript 1. He then goes on to say, quote, "Shadows are fascinating entities. They exist only because something else exists. This something is the owner object. Without the tree, the shadow of the tree wouldn't be there. Also, shadows are there only because something else isn't there. This something else is light. What a tenuous existence, depending on two other things, one by its presence, the other by its absence." End quote, subscript 1. The term photography, translated from Greek, means to write or draw with light. This definition shows that photographers must depend upon light to create their photographs. Many early photographers focused their attention particularly on the way they could illuminate objects and on the essence of light as a whole. These artists made explicative images that displayed clever compositions, a compacted range of tones, and effects of soft focus. Photographers that fell into this category became known as pictorialists, subscript 2, some of whom are featured in this exhibition. Street photography was created at the same time photography as a whole was created, although they didn't have a name for the genre at the time. After all, street photography is just capturing candid moments in public spaces. There is no specific equipment or subject needed. The subject can range from people to buildings to objects. In fact, the subject of the images in this exhibition range from architecture to people to nature. As long as the photograph involves a public place, it falls under the umbrella of street photography. This was, and still is, such a popular type of photography due to this versatility and openness. Anyone with a camera could be a street photographer. However, the work in this exhibition was created by some of the best photographers of all time. Some of these photographers' main genre was not even street photography, yet they still created amazing street images. These people were pioneers of their time and made incredible art with what was available to them. The photographers range from William Henry Fox Talbot to Alfred Stieglitz to Roy Decarava and several more. In addition to the Fole and Peterson that we heard before, you will also hear quotes from some of the artists themselves. Illustrations. Figure 1 displays a seemingly simple composition of the front of a house, a door cracked open, and a broom leaning on the wall. The lack of motion or people gives off a calm, tranquil mood. While this is true, the shadows and darkness of the house's interior produces a mysterious effect. This image was displayed in Talbot's photo book, The Pencil of Nature, one of the first photo books ever created. Talbot created this photo using his own salted paper print process. Quote, "The process involved sensitizing writing paper by dipping it in a solution of sodium chloride and coating one side with silver nitrate. An impression of an object was then made by placing it on the sensitized side of the paper and exposing it to the sun. Talbot ultimately went on to create photographic negatives in a camera obscura, from which multiple positive images could be produced." End quote, subscript 3. These reproducible positive images are called salted paper prints. Figure 2, a gelatin silver print, shows a variety of city buildings, each exposed differently due to how much and where the light was hitting. Due to the distortion, we can see that this image was taken with a wide-angle lens and an outdated camera, even for his time. This image is from the start of Evans' career, when he would photograph skyscrapers and machinery in New York City. However, Walker Evans is most well known for his photojournalism and documentary photography during the Great Depression, which started around the time this photograph was made. He was hired by the Farm Security Administration to document improvement efforts of the government, mainly in rural communities. Evans once said, quote, "When I first made photographs, they were too plain to be considered art, and I wasn't considered an artist. I didn't get any attention at all. The people who looked at my work thought, well, that's just a snapshot of the backyard. Privately, I knew otherwise, and through stubbornness stayed with it." End quote, subscript 4. Figure 3 also exhibits buildings as its subject, but in a different manner. This vertical image has a sharp focus that makes seeing details much easier. The contrast between light and shadow is very high, giving the image a dramatic effect. This is further emphasized by the dreary sky behind the buildings. Alfred Stieglitz was, quote, "determined to prove that photography was a medium as capable of artistic expression as painting or sculpture." End quote, subscript 5. Stieglitz was a huge supporter of modern art and contributed many photographs to this genre. This photograph, however, was taken near the end of his life when he focused his time on his gallery and rarely made photos anymore. This image was captured from the window of his gallery, as many of his final photographs were, subscript 5. Figure 4 shows a child in the shadows of a building. The boy is looking at the camera, but we cannot see any of his details or features since there is no light shining on him. The juxtaposition of this small child between two huge buildings is quite intriguing. Cartier-Bresson captured this image in the prime of his photography career. According to the Museum of Modern Art, quote, "his intensive work of the early 1930s helped define the creative potential of modern photography, and his uncanny ability to capture life on the run made his work synonymous with The Decisive Moment," the title of his first major photo book. End quote, subscript 6. He took photographs around the world throughout his career that continued to shape photographers even after his passing. Figure 5 showcases an oddly shaped tree amongst rocks and a scene of mountains in the background. The abnormal tree branches cast strange shadows on the rocks and ground below. The image, like most of his work, shows strong contrast and a breathtaking scene. Ansel Adams is one of the most famous landscape photographers of all time. His specialty was photographing the American West. He was a strong believer that you do not take a photograph, you make one. Adams said that, quote, "a great photograph is a full expression of what one feels about what is being photographed in the deepest sense, and is, thereby, a true expression of what one feels about life in its entirety." End quote, subscript 7. His photographs of the American wilderness are still widely influential today. Figure 6 is a very compelling photograph. As the title states, the main subject is a young man smoking a cigarette. His hat is shading his eyes, making him more anonymous and relatable to the viewer. It also evokes a sense of mystery. Who is this man, and why doesn't he want to be seen? Penn was a portrait, still life, and fashion photographer. He is mostly known for his time at Vogue, which lasted over 60 years. In addition to Vogue, he did independent advertising work for brands such as Clinique. Penn preferred shooting in the studio, but captured this photograph in New Orleans on a personal documentary shoot. He traveled around the world shooting for Vogue, which formed his skills. When he wasn't traveling, he spent most of his time in the studio or printing, which was another one of his passions. He approached photography as an artist with creativity, not just as a job. Subscript 8. Figure 7 is an image of two children in a street taken from behind. The vantage point is very low, so it looks as if we are the children who have to look up to see the city. Parks is well known for his photojournalism and documentary photography. He mainly photographed issues like poverty, civil rights, and how African Americans were being treated in the United States at the time. He worked at Life magazine for over 20 years, where he produced his most influential photo essays. He took on hard-hitting topics such as Harlem gangs, the Black Panthers, his personal experiences with racism, and segregation in the South. Additionally, he made photo essays on specific people, including Flavio da Silva, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. His photos were so effective that people were moved to action and lives were changed. In addition to photography, he excelled in music, composing, poetry, writing, and filmmaking. Subscript 9. Figure 8 displays a young woman in a fancy dress, walking through a neighborhood filled with trash and graffiti. She is glowing in the sunlight, while the trash and graffiti are mainly in the shadows. There is a stark difference between this girl and her environment in this image. Also, she is walking away from the light and into the darkness, which could indicate she is not doing as well as her appearance wants us to believe. De Carava's main subject of his work was Harlem. He wanted to show the world what he loved about the neighborhood, the sense of community, cultural traditions, and talents. He photographed friends, family, musicians, as well as strangers. His printing style can be identified by his use of warm, dark tones along with little contrast. Subscript 10. Figure 9 is an image of a dark alley in Paris where at the end stands an illuminated silhouette of a figure. Doisneau took the saying "light at the end of a tunnel" very literally in this photo. The sign at the top of the frame says Mercerie, which in English would be a shop similar to a haberdashery. Doisneau is one of the most famous French photographers. He worked in many fields of photography, including advertising and fashion, but is most known for his humanist and photojournalism work. The ICP states, quote, "He photographed a vast span of people and events, often juxtaposing conformist and maverick elements in images, marked by an exquisite sense of humor, by anti-establishment values, and, above all, by his deeply felt humanism." End quote, subscript 11. He had a very long and successful career. His personal photo archives contain about 450,000 images. Figure 10 shows a scene of a small town in the United States. It shows a few simple buildings and some cars. The sky is dull, the streets are bare, and there are no people in sight. This photograph seems to embody boring, simple, small-town America. Robert Adams focused his photography on the American West's changing landscape. He tried his hand at photographing rural, urban, and suburban landscapes, but really made a mark with his images of suburban landscapes. His goal was to show the fragile beauty that still exists despite the tough relationship between humans and nature. Adams' photos can be identified by their mixture of grief and hope. Adams himself said, quote, "Are there affirmable days or places in our deteriorating world? Are there scenes in life right now for which we might conceivably be thankful? Is there a basis for joy or serenity, even if it felt only occasional? Are there grounds now and then for an unironic smile?" End quote. Subscript 12. Bibliography.